All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. I'm here to present the Pandemic Assistance Revenue Program and Emergency Relief Program Phase 2. Introductions right away here. I am Brandon Dahl, County Executive Director for Dakota, Scott, Washington, and Ramsey counties. I'm here to present the information based upon the Farm Service Agency knowledge and information that we have for outreach on these programs. I definitely want to thank Renewing the Countryside for inviting me to present this information and get this information out for everyone to kind of learn a little bit more of this. To kind of go right into it, uh, here's kind of the agenda. We'll go over the Pandemic Assistance Revenue Program, or PARP, going over the overview, resources, and tools, and then diving into the Emergency Relief Program Phase 2, or ERP-2, then going into kind of getting started with FSA, and then following up with any questions at the end. Going into the Pandemic Assistance Revenue Program overview, the Pandemic Assistance Revenue Program provides financial assistance to eligible producers who experience at least a 15% or more decrease in their revenue from 2020 calendar year compared to their other calendar years of 2019 or 2018, which is selected by you as the producer for your eligible agricultural commodities. The sign-up period is currently ongoing until June 2nd of 2023. Reason why we're having a virtual meeting right now is that's right around the corner, but most of you are producers as well, so you'll be in the fields here soon enough, and that deadline will be coming soon. Looking at the benchmark years that this program looks at is the 18 or 19 years, which is elected by you as the producer, where you've received allowable gross revenue for the calendar years, or potentially the expected 2020 calendar year revenue, for where there is no allowable revenue from 18 or 19. So if you're a new producer for 2020, there are provisions that allow you to bring in a allowable gross revenue from that applicable 2020 year. Some producer eligibility requirements. The producer must have been in business or farming to produce an agricultural commodity during any part of the calendar year of 2020 and was either entitled to a share of the agricultural commodity for marketing, would have been a shareholder of the agricultural commodity produced or marketed, and then meet the payment limitation eligibility, AGI, which is average adjusted gross income, and the wetland and highly erodible provisions. Our PARP has a payment limitation. The maximum amount for persons or legal entities is $125,000. Payments to joint operations, including general partnerships or joint ventures, not to exceed $125,000 per person or legal entity, unless the first member is another joint operation. This is kind of getting in a little bit into the depths of kind of the payment limitation and things that we review in the county office side. But this is something that we can talk with you if you have any questions about that as well. Some of the eligible commodities for this program are crops, aquaculture, livestock, livestock byproducts, or other animal byproducts. They must be produced as part of your farming operation and intended to be commercially marketed. Some of the ineligible commodities, wild free roaming animals, horses or other animals used or intended to be used for racing or wagering, any aquatic species that does not meet the definition of aquaculture, cannabis sativa L, or any part of the plant that does not meet the definition of hemp, and anything timber related. Uh, PARP allowable gross revenue includes all revenue a producer received on a cash basis during the applicable calendar year as reported on a Schedule F or other similar federal tax forms, and must have been received from the production or sale of that ag commodity, including crops, aquaculture, livestock byproducts, or any other animal or animal byproduct. The allowable gross revenue does not include your costs or expenses associated with the revenue generated by the farming operation, and the commodity must have been produced in the United States or produced outside the US by a producer located in the US and marketed in the US. Kind of diving into some of the allowable revenues and then exclusions of the gross revenue. These are all highlighted underneath the Schedule F. However, there are some things that you might need to look at and other documents that might need to amend some of these allowable and non-allowable areas of revenue. So looking at potentially the Schedule F line item 1C is sales of purchased livestock and other resale items. Right now, the allowable revenue is there's no exclusions besides the resale of an item not held for characteristic change. What that means is that it's kind of looking at is, was a plant bought at a smaller stage of say 4 inches tall and then held on for a certain period of time and it grew to 18 inches tall and you've resold that. That revenue is allowable. However, if it never changed that characteristic, you wouldn't be able to include that gross revenue in there. Looking at line item 2 is all sales of livestock, produce, grains, or other products you raised or information that could have been reported on a Schedule F. Allowable revenue is all sales of agricultural commodities purchased for resale, less the costs or other basis of such commodities. Revenue from raised breeding stock, inventory carried over from the prior tax year, post-production activities. Some of those are the allowable. Exclusions would be any animals or products consumed by the owner, lessee, or contract grower, any wild or free roaming animals, horses or other wagering animals, timber, aquatic species not grown as food for human or livestock consumption, for industrial or biomass uses, as fish raised for feed, for fish that are consumed by humans, or as ornamental fish for propagation and rearing in aquatic medium, and anything related to cannabis sativa L and any part of the plant of the seeds that is not derived or characteristic of the hemp plant. Line item 3A, which is your cooperative distributions or your 1099 PATR. The allowable is anything that's taxable amount of cooperative distributions directly related to the sale of commodities produced by the applicant. There are no exclusions on this part, but the big category on this one is must be produced by the applicant in order to view that as allowable revenue for calculation of this program. Line item 4A is agricultural program payments or anything related to your 1099G, which is things that we're able to provide some of the assistance from our programs. The allowable revenue that you would include for your allowable revenue would be any ARC PLC payments, any biomass program payments, our dairy margin coverage, our loan deficiency payments or market loss gains, market facilitation programs, our previous MPP dairy or margin protection program, dairy program payments, or our seafood trade relief program. Those are allowable payments underneath the revenue. The excluded ones that you would exclude from your revenue would be any coronavirus food assistance 1 and 2 payments, our pandemic livestock indemnity program, our spot market hog pandemic program, and any other pandemic assistance payments that were not from the loss of agricultural commodities or the loss of revenue from agricultural commodities, including but not limited to any cost share assistance, loss of buildings, other programs such as the Conservation Reserve Program and 2020 Emergency Relief Program payments. One of the other ones in here would be any potential NRCS cost share assistance. Those are conservation program payments or cost share assistance, and those would be underneath that excluded category as well. Item 5A through 5C is the Commodity Credit Corporation loans reported under election, which is your 1099A. Allowable revenue if it's reported under election, if elected to be treated as income and reported to the IRS. Most of the time, these would be our marketing assistance loans that we would be able to assist with for kind of our temporary loan for assistance into allowing you to actively market your product. The main ones that we work with in the Dakota office would be cash crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, oats, but there are some other programs available for these loans as well. Schedule F, line 6 is crop insurance proceeds and federal crop insurance disaster payments. These allowable would be any crop insurance proceeds received from federal crop insurance or a private loan plan, regardless of the crop year, if it was reported to the IRS. Federal crop program payments under the following are 2017 WIP program, our emergency livestock and assistance program, our livestock forage program, our livestock indemnity program, the non-insured crop disaster assistance program or NAP, the on-farm storage loss program, our tree assistance program, and then also our WIP, or which is our wildfire hurricane indemnity program, payment plus. Any other grants received from FSA or for losses available to applicable crops. Going through the gross revenue certification, applicants will self-certify their 2018 or 2019 calendar year as determined by the program application and their actual 2020 gross revenue. Here it says 18 or 19 as you only need 1 year as your benchmark year so that it can compare your 2020 actual to find if there was that 15% or more drop in revenue from your benchmark year, which is your normal year of revenue that we would be comparing to. The note here is the allowable gross revenue certification will be for the applicant's entire operation nationwide. It doesn't matter where you have for different locations. If you have livestock grown in, being ranched in Texas, but you grow your vegetables up here in Minnesota, you would include all of your revenue based upon what you're being able to gross revenue for this one application. Some producer exceptions. Producers may request a COC adjustment to the 2019 actual revenue for the following reasons. If you are a new producer in 2020, a new producer in 2019 without a full year's revenue to report, Documentation to support expected allowable gross revenue in 2020. It includes financial documents such as business plans, cash flow statements that demonstrate the expected level of gross revenue, documentation to support production capacity, use of existing production capacity, or physical alterations that demonstrate the production capability. Producers may request a COC adjustment to the 18 or 19 revenue for the following reasons. There's an increase in capacity from 18 or 19 into your 2020 year. Any applicant requesting this adjustment would provide documentation within 30 days of submitting your application for this adjustment, which is on the FSA 1122A form, which is just the continuation form of this. And if you don't apply for that timely, the COC would determine this ineligible for the adjustment and would just rely upon the numbers that you provided for your application. Application submission. Producers will submit one application for their entire operation nationwide. You can submit it in person, by mail, electronically, which is fax, email, or any authorized use method outlined in farmers.gov website, or submitting an online application after completing your level 2 authentication account. Right now, we are doing these all digitally. So if you come in person, we will just have you do everything on our signature pad and complete that application here so that it's digitally in our records. The PARP payments, looking at the applicant must have suffered at least a 15% or greater decrease in your revenue from your benchmark of 2018 or 2019 comparing to your 2020 allowable revenue, which these are calendar year. An applicant whose decrease in gross revenue is less than 15% is ineligible for PARP payment. However, we are suggesting that if you don't know your numbers, where that calculation comes into effect for your 15% is to file your application. If it's not over that 15%, a payment won't come out. However, the application process, it wouldn't hurt to put it in there based upon potential provisions that might change later on. Payments from other pandemic programs and ERP phase 1 payments will be reduced on these calculated payments. This is all system generated. There's no need for on your part to worry about what payments will be needing to be dropped off for calculation purposes or anything like that. There will be an estimated calculation report for these programs to help provide you some clarification on this. Additional program and payment factors will be established at a later date. Those will be coming closer towards the deadline of June 2nd. Payments will not be made until the application deadline has passed, which again is June 2nd. So you file your application, they will remain here in the office as an application until things are able to be cycled through for processing of those payments. This says demo the PARP farmers.gov website to review resources and tools. I'm not sure if we will be able to get there or not. Sarah, can you see that?
Nope, we're only seeing the PowerPoint. So if you stop share and select the other screen. Yep, now we can see it.
Thank you. So if we go to the farmers.gov website, and you can either search up here for the Pandemic Assistance Revenue Program, this will bring you to this direct page where all of our information relating to this program is here. There are some quick links up here of resources and able to find things a little bit faster. Kind of looking through some of these program eligibility needs and outlines here as we spoke in the slides. Here are all the forms that might be applicable to be needed for the application. If you've never been into an FSA office, the last forms here are needed to support your application and get you into our system to support the, like I said, the application on this. But the FSA 1122 is the Pandemic Assistance Revenue application. And then the 1122A is the continuation sheet to have that applicable adjustment being requested to the county committee. And then if you're not unsure of where your nearest service center is, you can come here and find your state, county on that. There are a tool that we can use here, which is right here, just right before the applications, where it will pull up an Excel spreadsheet for you to use if you want to, kind of going through it, detailing a little bit better of what is allowable, what is needing to be excluded. And then it also generates the application form for you as well. So this is a great resource that we've been relaying to producers, and we've been getting applications in using this revenue tool as well. And I will come back to our slides here.
Perfect.
As outlined here on the slide here, it's just above the applications, where it says FSA 1122 hyperlink. You find the revenue tool here, which is a great resource to kind of help outline what this Pandemic Assistance Revenue Program is requiring and requesting to be included or excluded on that. So in summary, participants will review your 2018 and or 2019 allowable gross revenue sources to determine which year is most similar to your expected gross revenue, and then looking at it for your 2020. As stated in the next bullet, is determine your calendar year 2020 allowable gross revenue. Once this has been determined, contact your FSA office to complete the application, or submit it online via our digital service. And just as a reminder, all applicants and applications are subject to spot check. When signing the application, the applicant is certifying to having documentation to support their certifications of the application here. I do believe that is that. So right now we will kind of go into some of the questions that are in the chat. I do believe I can grab it. Yes.
Brandon, may I ask, this is Sarah W. May I ask a clarifying question here? This may be different for ERP-2, so I might be jumping ahead, but for PARP, if 2020 was your first year farming, can you still apply for these funds based on your anticipated or your projected revenue for that year?
Yes. That was, I think, the second slide that we had, which I can find it here. I think there was some exceptions. Right here.
Okay, great. Okay. And then
go ahead.
The other question was, do you need a farm number to apply for PARP?
No,
Okay, thank you.
no, we don't need to have a specific farm number or where you are located. It's something that we can definitely do to assist setting up for potential future applications or future benefits. But this is not specific where we need to know a farm number for you. This program is specifically looking at your revenues from either 18, 19, and then specifically 2020 to determine that 15% decrease in revenue.
Thank you.
Yep. Going into some of the questions here. Vegetables covered by NAP in this program. I'm assuming that the question is looking at, are the revenues based upon this eligible to be included in this program? Yes, they are. Anything that would be used for commercially marketing and having a revenue for those applicable years, you would be able to provide that revenue as a allowable gross revenue for this application. Will we be getting the slides later? Yes, I can definitely send them to Sarah's, I should say, and they can get that out to the list. And it looks like Sarah George said that already. Crop insurance payments, how does this affect? That would be where in your line item 6, if you have a Schedule F, is where you would need to make sure that it is applicable to this category here, is where crop insurance proceeds received from federal crop insurance or a private plan, it's considered underneath the allowable revenue.
Brandon, I have a question on that.
Yeah.
So when you say allowable revenue, let's say you had pockets of drought, and so you got the crop insurance payment. So does that goes against because you're a little bit healthier than if you would have had a low coverage, correct? I'm just comparing the two in my mind. Like crop insurance, you can get it at 50% or 75%. So how does this impact when you say it's allowable revenue? I don't know the impact on this program though.
So looking at it as allowable revenue, to have it as your basis for comparison from your normal year of either 18 or 19, and then your disaster year or the pandemic year of 2020 would be where any crop insurance proceeds would be allowable, since it is a part of potentially growing that commodity or that production of it. So since it is a part of growing that product, it would be an allowable revenue to include in your application of that calendar years.
So you're counting it as income, like part of your gross income. Is that what you're saying?
It is allowable to include as a revenue income.
Okay.
If that helps answer your question.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Now, our new farmers wouldn't have a Schedule F if they were new to 2020. So you're saying that the committee can also decide what is a fair value or their business plans, because some of them wouldn't have that Schedule F, correct?
So yeah, if they are a new producer for 2020, there is a provision where they could request that adjustment and then support and provide that information to the FSA office to allow the county committee to review and then do that adjustment or verify that adjustment that was put on the FSA 1122A, which is that continuation sheet, which is for applicable adjustments of either your 18, 19, or 2020 year. That continuation sheet does outline it. It's got good yes and no questions, and tells you where to go and what to fill out, to help assist potentially requesting for that adjustment. So you wouldn't potentially have to have a Schedule F. They reference it a lot here as it's a applicable tax form, but anything that would be reported as a federal tax income form, or if you are a new producer for 19 or 2020, there are those adjustments and requests for exceptions there.
Brandon, may I ask another question?
Yes.
So for those new producers, if let's say they were signed up for a farmer's market and they had a crop plan for how much they expected to grow in 2020, and they were going to sell at 2 farmers markets, and they had their kind of projected income from that kind of spelled out, would that be sufficient?
I am unsure at this time, but that is something that we could take a look at, or I should say the county committee can take a look at that as supporting documentation to on that request form of the 1122A. If there is any questions or needed clarification, I know we've brought producers in to help kind of give a little bit more background of it. But if they're a brand new producer, any information would be helpful to these new applicants.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. The question about is there anything drought, hail? So the Pandemic Assistance Revenue Program, or PARP, is only specifically looking at your revenue decrease from either 18 or 19 as your average year to what was your revenue in 2020. If there was that 15% drop, the application would initiate a payment. If there wasn't that 15% drop, we are able to take your application if you hit that 15% or not. If you're wanting to apply, we'll take that application. It's just that the program won't issue any payments out until it hits that 15%. But depending upon what applications come in after or before June 2nd deadline, we're just saying to apply if you feel that you want to apply for this program.
Brandon, I have a question too. Does everything go to the committee in your county? Does everything have to be approved through or is it something that staff look at and evaluate? Because it seems like that's an awful lot for a county committee to approve or disapprove.
So per our policy, there are delegations that can be redelegated to the county executive director, such as myself, based upon routine cases. And it's dependent upon each county office and that county committee on their comfortability of what is routine and when that's not routine. It's kind of something that we're in discussion with of what they're requiring or wanting to do. So it's kind of unknown of what each county office will have for redelegations or anything like that, but most of the time for these programs that come out to help specific cases such as the Emergency Relief Program or the Pandemic Assistance Revenue Program, we tend to bring them to the county committee as they are producers themselves and kind of can understand where some of this information might be coming from, some of the nuances of what maybe some of this revenue information might be looking at to help support some of these applications. So it's really dependent, but tends to lean towards the county committee reviewing and acting upon these.
May I?
Go ahead.
Sorry, I have a follow-up question to that. So if we're dealing with a county committee that doesn't have any, like there's nobody on that committee who has any specific knowledge about smaller specialty crop producers, and we're looking at, sending them projected revenues from a new farm, is there any guidance provided to them on that? I know I'm getting off topic here, but just thinking about, if we want to make sure that we're getting folks, an equitable opportunity for these funds, but there are folks who don't understand these farms making the decision. Is there something in place to help us handle that?
There are policies and procedures that do allow for the county committee to request the information back to the producer to bring in some more information, or even come in and kind of explain a little bit of what they're providing to us. As far as the kind of the small scale production, we normally try to get information from the producer to kind of help clarify what's going on. The worst case, there may be a potential where we would need to elevate this for further guidance of what the county committee should be looking at for those potential cases.
Thank you.
Looking at the next question, how will the size of the PARP payment be calculated? Will it just be the size of the decrease in revenue from the base year? There is a calculation, I do believe, out on the website to kind of help understand what that potential payment might be. However, there are some factors right now that are undetermined for us to applicably provide you what potential payment you might receive. But from how we're understanding it is, it looks at your percent loss of that 15% and calculates based upon that percent loss.
Brandon, some of the programs before there was disaster programs, you had to have had crop insurance in place or you were kicked out. Is there the requirement for having crop insurance for our producers for this program?
Not with the Pandemic Assistance Revenue Program, or PARP. The Emergency Relief Phase 2 is different, and that one does require a linkage for the next 2 applicable years, which we will get into the next couple of slides a little bit more on that. So PARP, no. ERP, yes, as far as crop insurance or potentially having that linkage of coverage. The next question is curious as to so far, what kind of farmers have been most impacted, those selling to restaurants? Currently, we don't know a whole lot of who has been impacted. We haven't had a whole lot of revenue of pandemic assistance revenue program applications come in, as I think most people are still trying to understand this and what is allowable, what's not allowable, and trying to keep the program separate from each other. It seems like they're similar, but there are different things that are needing to be done for each application. So that's where hopefully today we can help split some of those things apart and help you guys out. But as far as right now, I don't have a whole lot of who is impacted the most, or what kind of assistance might be out there of it, just since we haven't had a whole lot of applications yet. Next one is, we don't sell to restaurants, but lost our turkey market that year due to people not gathering for Thanksgiving. So that would be potentially a case where you did lose your revenue of that. So this program might be for you, depending upon where your numbers sit. So definitely, if you have specific questions, you can reach out to myself here at the Dakota office or wherever your operation is stationed in whatever county you are in. Going to farmers.gov and kind of scrolling to the bottom and finding that resource center or that service center would be beneficial, or reaching out to Renewing the Countryside to kind of help answer some of those questions as well. But we're here to help if you have specific questions of it. Not sure if I really answered that, but did my best on there. Could you expand onto why it may be good to apply even if the decrease is under 15%? Implying that these applications may ultimately be approved if all of the money is not used, or are you saying that the factors that go into the calculation could change? We don't know. Every program, there are some small changes later on. We just don't know. And I'm taking it as I don't want you to potentially miss out on if there was a rule change or a policy change. If you apply for it and it doesn't calculate a payment, the application didn't hurt to bring it in. It may have taken some of your time away from you, but for me, it's like I don't want you to not be able to get the assistance if there is a small change. Yes, the deadline would extend if there is any policy changes of this. But if you kind of know your numbers and it's relatively easy for you to apply, which is sending it in person, mail, dropping it off, stopping by, it's providing us, I think, 3 numbers and signing your name to file the application. And if you're a new producer, filing a few other forms here, but the application itself is fairly simple. It's just kind of that work to get those numbers for that application. What % of the loss is covered in this program? So the ERP or the Pandemic Assistance Program, as outlined here, is the 15% or greater loss in revenue from your 18 or 19 compared to your 2020 allowable gross revenue. So this program has a specific threshold of 15%, but we're open to taking any applications that you want to submit.
Brandon, how does tenants in common work? How does this work? You each have to bring in your own Schedule F, or kind of figure that out on just the land use? Because sometimes you can have tenants in common.
So that more or less works towards ownership of the land. Both these programs look at the producers who had risk in the production and sale of that crop. So it's not specifically land ownership. It's specifically looking at what commodity was grown or produced, and having that applicable revenue off of that commodity grown or product sold. All right, with that, we'll go into the Emergency Relief Program, or ERP, Phase 2, which covers losses to crops, trees, bushes, and vines due to a qualifying disaster event from calendar year 2020 or 2021. Phase 2 intends to fill additional assistance of gaps in coverage of eligible producers who did not participate in the existing risk management program, or phase 1, which is ongoing until June 2nd. So ERP phase 2 is specifically looking at, was there a disaster event that affected your crops in the years of 2020 or I should say 2021? On the application itself and in our website, it has an outline of the eligible disaster events for this application process. Phase 2 is tax year-based certification that provides assistance for producers that suffered a loss in revenue due in whole or in part to a qualifying disaster event that occurred in 2020 and or 2021 calendar year. In general, payments for phase 2 are based on the difference in allowable gross revenue between the selected representative benchmark year or years and the disaster year or years. So we'll be utilizing the benchmark years of 18 and or 19 and your disaster years if applying for in 2020 and or 2021. Looking at some of the definitions in the program, allowable gross revenue refers to the charts on the fact sheets or the back of the ERP phase 2 application, which is the FSA 521, or the emergency relief phase 2 tool that is outlined on the website that we'll be going over at a later slide here. Benchmark year definition is what best represents a typical year of revenue for the operation associated with the selected disaster year. And adjusted benchmark year revenue is used when a producer did not have any revenue in 18 or 19, did not have a full benchmark revenue in 18 or 19. The 18 or 19 benchmark revenue was not representative due to a physical expansion or reduction in the operation capacity for that disaster year. Disaster year revenue is the actual revenue from the year or years the producer suffered an eligible loss. Representative tax year, depending upon what tax, how you file your taxes, there's 3 years given here. If you file your taxes calendar year wide, you would be using your 2020 and or 2021. But if you file your taxes fiscally, you would be potentially looking at the 2022 taxes for a potential disaster event in 2021. So the tax year of 2021 or 22, IRS Schedule F associated with the selected disaster year revenue. The producer identifies the 2020 or 2021 tax year used as a representative revenue for a 2020 disaster event, or the 2021 or 2022 tax year used as the representative revenue year for the 2021 disaster year. The disaster year revenue must consist of consecutive years. So as outlined here, if you have a disaster year event in 2021, depending upon how you file your taxes, it would be either your 2021 or 2022 taxes. If it's calendar year, you'd be potentially looking at your 2021 taxes. If it's fiscal year, it would be most representative of what year of that revenue was affected by that disaster event. Eligibility requirements. Persons or legal entities that are entitled to an ownership share and are at risk in the crop production and marketing associated with the crops on the farm. They must be a U.S. citizen, a resident alien, also known as a lawful alien, partnership consisting solely of citizens of the United States or resident aliens, a corporation, limited liability company, or other organizational structure organized under state law consisting solely of US citizens or resident aliens, or an Indian tribe or Indian tribal organization. Some of the payment limitations for program year 2020, which includes phase 1 and phase 2 of 2020. This is a 125 payment limitation for specialty and high value crops, and then a $125,000 payment for other crops. For 2021 program year, it looks at the 2021 and 2022 phase 1, and then a 2021 phase 2 application as well to calculate your applicable payment limitation of $125,000 for specialty and high value crops, and a $125,000 for other crops. So a max $250,000 payment by program year, as long as there's no FSA 10 on file, which is a request for an increase in that payment limitation. So if you have specialty crops, which would be your fruits and vegetables, and other crops, which might be your row crops, there is a potential chance to get a $250,000 max payment underneath these limits. The optional payment limitation increase is that FSA 510 form, which is defined as a request for an optional payment limitation increase per program year by applying if at least 75% of a person or legal entity's average adjusted gross income is derived from farming, ranching, or forestry operations. This can be filing the increase by program year of 2020 and or 2021. Here's the linkage requirements for the emergency relief program. If you are going to be receiving a payment, you are required to obtain crop insurance or NAP coverage as applicable for the crops that suffered the revenue loss. And you must file an accurate acreage report for that year. The linkage requirements applies to all counties that the crop or crops identified on the application form, the FSA 522. Crop insurance and NAP application coverage agreement is planted in the applicable years. We will take a look at one as a live example towards the end of the slides here. So looking at this, the ERP or the Emergency Relief Program payment does require this linkage requirement for the next 2 applicable years, which is outlined here. Depending upon the date the producer receives the phase 2 payment, which again won't be until June 2nd or after June 2nd, the applicable closing date or deadline of this, the application sales closing date for the crop of the next 2 applicable consecutive crop years must be applied for. So as of right now, it would be 2023 or 2024, depending upon what insurance is available. It could be 24 or 25, again, or 25 and 26. So there is 2 years of available or needed linkage requirements. Some of these linkage requirements can be made as the following. If the crop was listed on the 522, which is the policy or application of what crop was affected by a eligible disaster event. If it is an insurable crop through normal commercial crop insurance, then the linkage is required crop insurance of 6,100 coverage level. If it's a NAP eligible crop, the NAP coverage must be at least 50-55, which is our basic or catastrophic level of that. If it's a NAP eligible crop, but the producer is ineligible for a NAP payment because they exceed the AGI for the applicable linkage year, then you would be looking at either applying for the NAP coverage, regardless of the producer's eligibility to receive that NAP payment, or potentially looking at whole farm revenue protection through RMA. If there is a crop that is not eligible for insurance or NAP, then it would be looking at the whole farm or micro farm, depending upon that applicable program that might be beneficial for you. So there is a new option here of getting that whole farm or micro farm revenue option from crop insurance. So kind of going into the allowable and excluding gross revenue, looking at, again, highlighting Schedule F, but these could be formulated using any applicable forms to highlight your revenue. Any sales of purchased livestock and other resale items for emergency relief program payments, or this program, we're specifically looking at anything that was a crop, not a livestock or byproduct of a livestock. We're looking at your crops on this. So looking at your sales of eligible crops purchased for resale that had a change in characteristic due to the time held, such as a plant purchased at the size of 2 inches and sold at 18 inches after 4 months. So any revenue based upon that would be allowable revenue to include to calculate your benchmark or revenue, disaster revenue year. Anything that has livestock relation would be excluded from the application of a gross revenue. Line 2, sales of livestock, produce, grains, or other products you raised as reported on the Schedule F. Again, we're looking at specifically what is a crop product. So sales of eligible crops grown and sold in the United States or its territories. Sales of eligible crops grown by the applicant resulting from value added through post-production activities. These post-production activities include making strawberry or jam from strawberries that you produced, or any other added value post-production of that crop. Sales of aquatic species that are grown for human or livestock consumption, industrial or biomass uses, fish raised as feed for fish that are consumed by humans, as ornamental fish propagated and reared in an aquatic medium. Exclusion of gross revenue would be any sales of animals and their byproducts, any animals of consumption for personal use, eggs, milk, mink pelts, revenue from animals for show, sport, or recreational purposes, wild, free roaming animals, revenue from raised breeding stock, any sales of agricultural commodities in which the value added through post-production activities, if reported on a Schedule C, and commodities grown in the United States are underneath the excluding gross revenue category. Schedule F, line 3A, which is the cooperative distributions. Here it is allowable if the taxable amount of the cooperative distributions directly relate to the sale of eligible crops produced by the applicant, such as per unit allocations paid to patrons for gross grain sales. The exclusion category would be distributions that are not directly related to the sale of eligible crops that were not produced by the applicant. Line item 4A is any agricultural program payments. What is allowable is the agricultural risk or ARC, and then the price loss coverage program payments. Any biomass crop assistance programs, loan deficiency payments, market loan gains, market facilitation program payments, the seafood trade relief program payments. For the disaster year only, emergency relief phase 1 payments issued to another person or entity for the applicant's share of the applicable crop, regardless of the tax year. Ones that are on the exclude gross revenue would be the Coronavirus Food Assistance Phase Program 1 and 2, any cost share assistance, loss of buildings, livestock portions or production, pandemic livestock indemnity programs, spot market hog pandemic programs, and any other conservation program payments, dairy margin coverage, or marketing assistance loans. Again, any NRCS payments, as those would be conservation program payments as well. Commodity Credit Corporation allowable, any CCC loans reported under election if elected to be treated as income and reported to the IRS, and any forfeited Commodity Credit Corporation loans. Schedule F line 6, crop insurance proceeds and the federal crop insurance disaster payments as reported or could be reported on a Schedule F. Any crop insurance proceeds less the admin fee and premiums. Non-insured crop disaster assistance payments less the administration fees and premiums. 2017 wildfire and hurricanes indemnity program. On-farm storage loss programs, emergency assistance for livestock, honeybees and farm-raised fish programs or ELAP, programs through grants agreements with FSA for losses of eligible crops, and any grants from NOAA or any other state funds, program funds that have direct loss for crop losses. Schedule F, item 7, any custom hire income would be excluded off of your calculations. And then item 8, any other income, including federal or state gasoline or fuel tax credits or refunds. What is allowable is any revenue directly related to the production of eligible crops that the IRS requires the applicant to report, such as, but not limited to, commodity-specific income received from state or local governments. And outlined here in the exclusion would be federal and state gas fuel tax credits, income from bypassed acres, income from pass-through entities such as an S-Corp or an LLC, certificate exchanges, net gains from hedging and speculation, wages, salaries, and tips, cash outs, rental of equipment or supplies, and revenue earned as a contract producer. The note here is an applicant is not required to have filed a Schedule F to determine allowable gross revenue. If an applicant did not file a Schedule F, the applicant will use the applicable federal forms filed to be determining your allowable gross revenue in the same manner as if it was a Schedule F filed. The gross revenue certification, again, looking at the pandemic revenue assistance program. You are self-certifying your disaster year, your benchmark revenue, your disaster year revenue based upon the representative tax year, and crops that had a revenue loss due to a qualifying disaster event. The allowable gross revenue will be for the applicant's entire operation nationwide again. Benchmark adjustments can be requested for an adjustment when the actual allowable gross revenue is not available in the benchmark year, such as a new producer. Highlighted here is that if you didn't have an 18 or 19, you'll certify to an adjusted benchmark revenue using the applicable form, which is the 521A. Or if you have a benchmark revenue that is not fair representation of the selected disaster year because there was a change in the producer's or your operation capacity. It could refer to the potential scope that a farming operation either produce more crops on more acres or less crops on less acres. So there is a provision that you could request an adjustment. Changes in that operation capacity is either decreasing in operation capacity or increasing. Your decrease, requesting an adjustment to the benchmark year must be completed by the producer if there has been a decrease in operation capacity in a disaster year compared to their benchmark year. An increase in your operation capacity, it may be requested or may be completed by the producer if there is an increase in your operation capacity in that disaster year compared to your benchmark year. ERP adjusted benchmark revenues, the worksheet, the FSA 521A, which is the worksheet on the emergency relief program phase 2, is where producers are requesting that benchmark year adjustment. A tool has also been developed and can be used in conjunction with this 521A to calculate that benchmark revenue adjustment. The tool can be used to assist producers in determining allowable gross revenue for both benchmark and disaster years, which I will go into showing where that tool is and the applicable website. The adjusted benchmark revenue request. This county committee may request documentation from the producer to support that certification of that adjusted benchmark revenue. Some examples would be financial documents such as a business plan or cash flow statement that demonstrate an expected level of revenue, sales contracts or purchase agreements, and any documentation supporting production capacity, use of existing production capacity, or physical alterations that demonstrate production capacity. How to submit your application. We submit one application, the FSA 521. For your entire operation nationwide. If requesting an adjusted benchmark adjustment, the 521A will also need to be submitted. And then the FSA 522, which is the linkage form, will need to be submitted as well to complete the application process. It can be in person, by mail, faxing, emailing, scanning, however it may be. You can get it into us. We'll take it and we'll be able to process that application. Phase 2 payments. There is an initial maximum payment amount. Upon approval, payments will be issued using a maximum payment amount, which currently for 2020 and 2021 is $2,000 per program year, minus any phase 1 payments. So right now there will be a slight payment coming out if you did not apply for phase 1, but the remainder of it would be then coming after the deadline of June 2nd. The maximum payment amount will be prorated between specialty and other crops by the percent of the expected revenue certified by the producer. Once sign up concludes, the final payment factors are determined, and then the additional payment based upon further past that $2,000 would be made to producers. So we'll kind of go into the demo of this. I will click the link and get this shared. So this is a different website than farmers.gov. This one's actually our fsa.usda.gov website underneath our emergency relief phase of this. So if we scroll to about half the page here, we can already start seeing some of the applicable forms, such as the phase 2 application, the allowable revenue worksheet for that adjustment. If there's a continuation, that if there wasn't enough space on the original application, there is a continuation form. All of the instructions are off to the side. And then also the 522, which is the crop insurance and/or NAP coverage agreement linkage requirement. We do have the dashboard for producers to review, frequently asked questions, and then the phase 2 tool, which opens up and outlines a little bit of what is allowable, what could be excluded. And then once you put all that information in, it generates the application for you to submit. About the programs is all of the information here. If you're wanting to read through some of that information of the applicable emergency relief underneath those forms there. But going back into our slideshow here. So kind of outlining a little bit here in a slide of what I just went over is using that ERP phase 2 tool underneath the USDA.gov website is a beneficial tool for producers to use to help utilize and generate that application for you. ERP phase 2 summary, producers will review their 18 and or 19 allowable gross revenue sources to determine which best represents a typical revenue year for your operation. The participant will then determine their tax year of 2020, 2021, or 2022 as applicable for your representative tax year allowable gross revenue. Once that has been determined, you can then contact your FSA office and we will help you file that application with those numbers that you have found and provided to us. Before we get into the next, getting started with the Farm Service Agency. So it's kind of, if you are a new producer, kind of walking through some of the steps that might be applicable to you to kind of get some of your information started and getting introduced to an FSA or Farm Service Agency office and getting some of those benefits there. I'm going to go into some of the questions that we have here. So I will start off. Is ERP-2 available only in counties where there was a federally declared disaster? No. If you are self-certifying that there was an eligible weather event or disaster event that affected your crops in part or in whole, you can apply to this program. As Sarah said here, in 2020, Rock County, and 2021, there's a reference to some of the things. There is information out there of what has been determined for drought underneath our drought designation, which that is, it needed to have been a D2 level for 8 weeks or a D3 or higher to be considered an eligible drought event for the emergency relief program phase 2. And that is outlined on the application itself, which I'm going to go back and I'm going to grab that website again. As it outlines on the application what events are eligible to be considered underneath the program application.
May I add something in there? There's also on that website is a list of counties in Minnesota and Wisconsin that were declared eligible for this because of drought specifically. So you can find your county listed there. Yep.
So we do have that resource for drought designation, but there are different ones. As stated here, I'll just read it here. The applicant experienced a decrease in allowable revenue due to necessary expenses related to the loss of eligible crop due in part or in whole to a qualifying disaster event that occurred in 2020 or 2021. Qualifying disaster event means wildfires, hurricanes, floods, derechos, excessive heat, winter storms, freeze, smoke exposure, excessive moisture, and a qualifying drought and related conditions occurring in that 2020 or 2021 year. And then it goes on to clarify that US drought monitor is needed for the drought designation. So it doesn't need to be a federally declared disaster. It is a eligible disaster event to be eligible for self-certification. Does emergency relief phase 2 apply to livestock? No, it is just specifically looking at applicable crops. What is considered a micro farm? Sarah has put that out there on RMA. Since I'm not a part of the risk management agency, I don't know their definitions of the micro farm program, but that link in the chat here is a great resource to kind of learn a little bit more of it, potentially contacting a local crop insurance agent to kind of learn a little bit all about that program. And on the rma.usda.gov website, you can find the links for applicable offices that might be available to kind of talk about that a little bit more.
Brandon, I'm sorry, may I interrupt and add something there? We are going to be putting together some resources for you all about the 4 different types of crop insurance as part of this program. And so that's forthcoming. Just so that's out there.
Good to know. On the linkage requirement, if a farm is eligible for a whole farm revenue or micro farm policy, aka they meet the revenue requirements for those programs, does obtaining that product for the next 2 years definitely fulfill the linkage requirements? Is there a scenario in which having a whole farm is not sufficient? To our knowledge, as long as you have the applicable 2 years to cover the crop or crops that were affected by the disaster event, you would be sufficiently covered for the linkage requirements. So kind of summarizing here, the emergency relief program phase 2 looks at eligibility requirements of being a crop disaster event. So only crops with a eligible weather disaster event and having 2 years of applicable crop insurance, where the Pandemic Assistance Revenue Program, or PARP, is looking at your revenue years and specifically looking at 2020 to see if there was a 15% or more revenue loss for that program eligibility. Question came in, if you're applying for phase 2, are you automatically also applying for phase 1? Unfortunately, no. Phase 1 has concluded, and that was specifically related to if you had a crop insurance payment. The national office sent those applications out to those applicable producers for them to review and certify to that. So right now it's only looking at phase 2 eligibility. There wouldn't be an automatic going back to phase 1 because since that had a different eligibility requirement and looked at different data specifically to crop insurance.
Brandon, may I ask another question?
Yep.
So for the crop insurance, would producers need to have that in place now, or would they just need to buy it? I have notes here that say that they would need to purchase it within 60 days of filing, but I don't think that that's right.
To my knowledge, it is after you receive that payment, you would then have to start looking into the next applicable coverage years. So
Okay.
since payments won't be coming out until June 2nd, that's when eligibility would be coming into effect of that. If you already currently have it, those could be counted towards your years, but it would be where that payment is then issued out, is how our policy states.
So Brandon, actually, the March 15th date was the drop dead date deadline for crop insurance. So unless you acquire new land, you cannot take it out anymore. So the next opening would be for January probably of 2024.
Correct. Yep. So crop insurance would be, we're potentially looking at 2024 for those. But if you had crop insurance, applicable for 2023, which was the deadline of March 15th, it could be counted for this linkage requirement. But if you have never had crop insurance before, once you receive that payment is when that linkage requirement would be coming into effect.
And so then you could, if you receive the payment after June 2nd, you could purchase some form of crop insurance for 24, 25, and that would meet the linkage. Okay.
You wouldn't be able to buy both years at the same time, but it would be,
Right.
you do your 2024 application, go through that year, and then once 2025 hits, then you would apply for that as well.
Okay.
There's a new question in the chat. Can a farmer apply for both PARP and ERP-2 and receive payments for both?
Yes. How we are told in the office is that we would have you file your emergency relief phase 2 first, and then file the pandemic assistance revenue program next. How that is needed is based upon looking at the final end payments so that it's filing correctly. So short answer, yes, you can apply for both. If you certify that you are wanting to apply for both, we will take both applications. We'll just have you file it, the ERP phase 2 first, and then the pandemic assistance revenue program second. But we'll do that on our end since it has to be all digitally now too. So.
And Brandon, on that note, the ERP-2 deadline is June 2nd. Yes. What is the deadline for the PARP?
June 2nd.
It is for both of them. Okay.
Yes.
There's also that I have some notes in here that historically underserved farmers are eligible for an increased payment factor, possibly with ERP-2, and that women are included as underserved for ERP-2. Does that sound right?
I am unsure of the potential increase in benefits.
Okay.
I'm not sure at this time personally yet. However, underneath our socially disadvantaged limited resource beginning and veteran farmer, our 860 form, socially disadvantaged underneath the Farm Service Agency is 2 categories you could certify to, women being one of them, or I have to grab my sheet here, being a Pacific American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian or Asian American, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander or Hispanics would be underneath this self-certification for socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher. So yes, in Farm Service Agency, we do acknowledge women producers as being socially disadvantaged. Any other questions? Before I move on, we'll move on to getting started with the Farm Service Agency. If not, we can wait for the end and have a conversation there. Getting started with the Farm Service Agency, you can contact your local FSA office to make an appointment. Scheduling an appointment is recommended as it allows us to schedule a time with you to meet one-on-one and give you a more personalized meeting. But that could be set up either on the phone, in an email, sending us a letter. We can do that, or utilizing the USDA Service Center locator and grabbing that information to make contact with us. We definitely do work with agricultural producers. Any means that might work best for you could be over the phone, email, potentially working through Zoom. If you wanted to set up a meeting that way, we have the Microsoft Teams ability. If it works best for you to work through mail, we can do that as well, or dropping by the office. If you're interested in additional FSA programs or loans, let us know and we can help identify those services for you that might fit your operation a little bit better. Working with FSA office, prepare, ask what documents you might need to bring. Some of those examples might be leases, bank account information, inventory, production records, legal paperwork, or personal identification numbers such as Social Security, employer tax identification number if you're an organization. Thinking about your vision, what is your farm vision? What do you want to see in 5 years on your operation? What are some of the challenges you are facing to help give us a little bit of guidance of where we might be providing resources to you at this appointment. But this is something that I definitely do is at the appointment, kind of get a little bit of information from you and understand what your operation, what your goals are, so that I don't bombard you with a lot of information that might not be relevant to your goals. After your appointment, file your acreage report. Stay connected with us in the local office, which would be considering using our Gov Delivery or text message service, stopping by every so often, sending us an email, or potentially utilizing some of our self-service options by registering on farmers.gov to view your farm loan information, request financial assistance, e-signing documents, viewing your farm records or other tracked information, which requires an establishment of a level 2 authentication account. But that is something that we can assist with you as well if there's any errors or issues that may arise to register those.
Brendan, could you elaborate what that account is, please? Thank you.
So that account is if you are, the level 2 authentication allows you to do a little bit more at home, as far as applying for applications, reviewing some information, being able to print your applicable farm maps or farm data information. It gives you access to some of our records that we have that are applicable to you. It is an option for producers on an individual basis to kind of get that working independently at home or at a remote service area on your own time.
Brandon, I have a question. Do you have to work with the FSA office in your, that's designated for your region or county? Or could you go somewhere else if you wanted? Are there?
So it is recommended to go where your farming practices or your farming operation is. However, we are a nationwide agency, and any USDA service center can assist you with any of your operation needs. The best example that we have is we do have producers in my 4 counties that some vacation down south in Arizona, Texas, Florida, and they need to sign some documents, and it's not working remotely or using our digital services or anything like that, that they just want to stop into a service center. They can look online, find the nearest service center down in their applicable county that they're close next to, and they can file the documents down there. It is then emailed up to here for us to service those forms. However, the county office down there can or has access to document those interactions in those documents and forms internally, and then just forward them on to us after they've data load them. So we do recommend going to the nearest county office that works for your operation, but any service center can assist with any of your needs for USDA purposes.
Brandon, I have a question. Let's say 2018 and 2019, you were a beginning farmer, you didn't farm as much. Then in 2020, you had some disasters, but you were farming more land. So therefore your 2020 doesn't accurately reflect, let's say you did 2018, 2019 of 300 acres. 2020, you did 600 acres, but you had disaster. How does that disparity work out?
So you would want to file those potential adjustments if you feel that is necessary to accommodate for those benchmark years adjustments, to accommodate for those additional acreages. So that's where we do have those adjustment requests to help with those situations. Going to keeping your FSA records current. Anytime that contact information such as phone numbers, cell phone numbers, addresses, email addresses change, just notifying us of that change using our customer data worksheet, or providing that in new information over the phone so that we can be in contact with you in regards to program needs, potentially any changes to your farming operation, or even just getting in contact with you of out of the necessity to update our records of that. Keeping your ownership and or leases information current, and if changes occur, so that we can report you on the correct farms that you have interest and risk in. Report any changes of your operation structure. A common example would be you're changing from an individual operation to an entity such as a joint venture, a corporation, a general partnership, or a limited liability company. Making sure that we know that there is that operational change to go through some of our applicable forms that you might need to fill out to make that change in our records. Notify FSA or the Farm Service Agency of any applicable banking changes, so that we can issue those payments direct deposit and expedite some of those payments to you faster than a paper check. And with our Paper Reduction Act, we are trying to get all of that done in a direct deposit form and send that digitally instead of creating that paperwork to go through. Ensure that your farming operation reflects your current operation in relation to land, labor, capital, and equipment. And any changes in your interest of your operation, such as increasing your livestock or increasing your crop acreages, or removing something from your operation, just notify us of that change so that we can then again provide the applicable documentation or make those changes based upon your request. If you have any further questions outside after this recording or this meeting, please give me a call, or again, going to your USDA locator website and finding your nearest one and asking questions to the staff there. Anyone is able to help you out to kind of find those benefits that might work for you. That being said, we will stop the recording now.